Hello, I'm David Lima, Chairman of the Linda May and Lima Foundation. Welcome to the Foundation's 2021 annual performance of an Elk Grove area story. This year, the story we present is of a world event which, like none other since the gold rush, has had a colossal effect on Elk Grove. This event was the Vietnam War. Not only was the community deeply affected by the war at the time, but the cascading effects of the war dramatically and permanently altered the fabric and vibrancy of the area, transforming it from an agricultural-based rural community to a thriving city of diverse and vast potential. We titled this chronicle, The Elk Grove Southeast Asia Story. As in the past, we will stay in keeping with our tradition of using the technique of a radio show format, but this year as a call-in talk show. This approach will allow you to hear from those with whom we've conversed to tell their diverse stories and family histories of the era in their own words and in their own voices. Before we begin the performance, I'd like to also ask you to please visit our website, lmmlfoundation.org, to delve deeper into this story by checking out the extended 7-episode version, which contains an even more expanded set of individual histories. Also posted on the website are additional family history recordings from which this performance was derived. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find this presentation of a unique piece of Elk Grove history enjoyable and informative.
Hello, you're listening to Elk Grove Radio. EGR is made possible by our generous sponsors and people like you. I'm Renee Valine.
And I'm Eliel Ramirez Gutierrez.
And now, please enjoy one of our favorite segments, History Today.
History is how we remember where we came from.
It's how we know who we are.
It's how we figure out who we want to be.
It's how we learn from our greatest mistakes and our finest achievements.
We use history to move forward into the future.
You never know when one small, seemingly insignificant moment will change the world.
But what about those moments that aren't yet written in our history books? Who will tell those stories? That's where our work begins.
Today, our program focuses on conversations with numerous Elk Grove area residents about their experiences during the Vietnam War.
While the stories shared are just a few of the hundreds, if not thousands, of similar Elk Grove area stories, they are representative of the conditions and consequences of the era which began in 1950.
Let's get right to it. Our first caller is Christine Trong, whose father, Bu Dien Trong, was South Vietnam's Minister of Information, and in 1975, when the country fell, he was the charge d'affaires to Singapore. Christine's insights, memories, and reflections on these years are an important account of the complexities, dangers, and outcomes emerging from post-World War II Southeast Asia.
Welcome, Christine. Your father's story sounds fascinating. As I remember from history class, Indochina was basically colonized by the French, but they left after World War II. Is that right?
Oh, actually, they got defeated at Dien Bien Phu, because I believe after World War II, they wanted to come back and reclaim Vietnam. But the so-called mini-revolution, or that call to arms for independence, had grown. And when the Japanese actually invaded Vietnam, all of a sudden it gave Asians the idea that they could revolt, that they could win. And I think that empowered them. So with Ho Chi Minh already having kind of a strong foothold, I believe, more so in northern Vietnam, when the French decided to come back, with the aid, I think, of the United States, is when they got defeated. But I do remember my mom saying that even though she came from a somewhat affluent and wealthy family, that she had gone to buy black cloth. And we were thinking, why did you go to buy black cloth? Because to join the resistance, you had to wear like these black pajamas. You know, they almost look like pajamas, as a symbol that we were anti-French. And what was ironic is that my grandfather ended up sending her to France along with her older brother to get them away from the notion of joining the resistance. So they ended up in France. I believe it might have been like in the late 40s or early 50s. But what I remember my father telling us was that, and it was funny, I mean, we used to sit around the dinner table and he used to tell us stories, and these stories would now be considered conspiracy theories. Because I remember back then he was talking about how President Diem was assassinated, and it was a plot that was backed by the U.S. with President Kennedy in office at the time because of South Vietnam's refusal to let the Americans assist. You know, he said we were pushing back and we were saying we can handle it. It's kind of, you know, our own problem, and we didn't really want them to be involved. And so what did they do? They had to get rid of the person who was giving them that pushback so that they could maybe take control with a puppet government or with people that were more friendly to U.S. politics. If you're going to help us with money to fight communism, if you're going to help us with advisors, we'll take that. But as you know, where there's money, there are strings attached. And so I think there were lots of strings that maybe the government wasn't counting on. So therefore, they were kind of pushing back. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this is because I wanted to honor my parents. A lot of things about the family is unusual. Many typical stories are that people were born, they lived their entire lives in Vietnam, and after 75 they ended up in the States. Our family is way different from that, with aunts and uncles from both sides of the family being educated outside of Vietnam and so on and so forth. And one of the things that's unique about our family is I always felt it was a democracy. My father always spoke to us like we were adults, like we could understand. Most parents of his generation didn't even talk to their kids, but he talked to us. But how we came to be in the States is because he treated our family like a democracy. He actually had us vote on where we wanted to end up. And so we wouldn't be where we are if it hadn't been for my parents. And I was thinking about how old they were when this all happened. And I cannot imagine a 44-year-old and a 41-year-old with 6 kids dragging your kids from one country to the next without any financial security and having the perseverance and the will to ensure that all of us got out of college. That was almost like a mandate. As long as you are Trong, you better have at least a bachelor's degree, otherwise you'll bring shame on the family. So I wanted to say that, you know, I'm doing this because to pay tribute basically to my parents, and I've really not had a lot of time to think about it because, you know, we just kind of live day to day. You kind of forget about the past. And then this project, and it kind of made me think a lot about all that they went through. We were so busy growing up ourselves and our own teen angst and everything we were going through without thinking about what they were going through.
Christine, thank you for sharing your story as a way to honor your parents.
And what a valuable recap of the history of the era. On the line with us next is Vietnam War veteran Philip Courtney, a graduate of Elk Grove High School in 1962 who served in Vietnam in the 1960s.
Hi, Philip. Tell us a little about yourself.
I'm from a pioneer family that came to this area from Ohio and Canada in particular in the 1850s and the 1860s. Elk Grove at that time, growing up in the late 50s and the early 60s, very small, typical American rural community. You knew people by face and by name. A stranger in town stuck out like a sore thumb. If you planted yourself at the middle of Elk Grove and went out all 4 points of the compass, in a mile or so you'd be in the rural country. From Elk Grove Boulevard during that early 60 period up into probably the early 70s or so, it was all farmland. From Elk Grove Boulevard, say, to Florin Road, heading north, all farmland. Just a few thousand people. Yesterday I was coming into Sacramento and I saw a population sign and it was well over 170,000. And then it's early 1965 and I'm 21, done with my college. Johnson, in late 64, President Johnson had called up 150,000 troops and I was one of those 150,000. Vietnam was going from advisory role to boots on the ground with troops very, very early in war conflict, call it what you want. Yeah, I was chosen. I was ready to leave Elk Grove, didn't know I was going to Southeast Asia, just knowing that I was getting out of Elk Grove, although I knew that I was a homeboy. I would eventually be coming back to Elk Grove, but then and there, yeah, I was ready to get away. And June the 9th, 1965, I'm on a bus heading for Oakland Induction Center. From there that night, 2, 3 in the morning, on the bus heading for Fort Ord, California. As you may know, Vietnam was an air war, a Huey war, a helicopter war. In the beginning of the conflict, they wanted to know how good we were, what that helicopter would do. And in November 14th of 65, both sides found out at the Battle of the Idrang, it was a bloodbath. And that they found out that, we're pretty tough. We, the Americans, went up against 3,000 NVA up in the Chupang Mastiff near the Cambodian border. Again, I was going through City College in the aeronautical program. I learned to fly, mechanic. So when they saw that on the induction center down in Fort Ord, they asked me, wow, that's something else. Are you sure? I said, yep, I did. I thought I would be a mechanic because I worked on that engine, but I did very well on the aptitude test. I sort of had at that time a photographic memory, air traffic control. I couldn't believe they offered that to me. I was a draftee. They could have given me an M16 if they wanted to. So that's one good thing I can say the government did. They took advantage of some skills that I had. I controlled traffic up in what was called the Central Highlands. That's up near the DMZ at a airport division, 1st Division, 1st Air Cav, on K. Wow. Yeah, it was a helicopter conflict war. I can still picture it today. The sky just like a locust in the sky, so many planes. And I'm supposed to control all those planes. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud to have served my country as I was asked to do. I had no regrets about that. And proud to be a grandson, great-grandson, great-great of pioneer families that settled in Elk Grove. You see me with my Army hat on and this hat on often, and that's not for me, that's for others. Those that came back and those that didn't. So I don't forget that when someone sees that, think for themselves on what that means, but I do it for them. I'd like to say this, for those that came back, thank you. For those that didn't, we still love you, and always will, and not forgotten.
Philip, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for your service in Vietnam.
Next, Steve Lee will share a story about his native country of Laos and the involvement of Hmong soldiers during the Vietnam War, including his father.
Hello, Steve. I understand you came to the U.S. when you were very young. How did you begin to learn more about this history?
In my eyes, I never saw myself differently than any other student on campus, so it prompted me to start having a conversation with my father. Okay, Dad, so I'm seeing this kind of stuff. Now tell me, retell what the stories that you've told me before. And what I found is that, a lot of the times in which he shared with me, he wanted me to be aware of the circumstances that surrounded us, so that we came, that which prompted us to come here to the United States, and the work that he did, the friends that he had, and the reasons why he picked America as opposed to any other country. So the story that he always tell me is living in the villages in the mountains of Laos, lived in northeastern Laos. He was born on the border of Vietnam, North Vietnam and Laos, and then my grandfather and my grandmother brought him to central Laos. I'd say central, but still somewhat of the northern part of Laos. And so he grew up, always wanted to go to school and wanted to have a higher education, but living in a remote area, which wasn't an option because there was no way to make any money except for farming for survival. But those kind of conversations prompted me to ask him, so how did you become a soldier? And he told me, said he needed to find a way to make some money. And so he joined the kind of like the Civil Defense Corps. And so he did that for a while, and he did the same thing that my grandfather did for the French. And prior to my father in his service, my grandfather had told him about the work that he did with the French, and a lot of it stems from assisting the French government during World War II, where the incursion of the Japanese army was moving down. My father would tell me that one thing they noticed about the Japanese Empire was they were really ruthless, and even in Southeast Asia, they didn't treat people very well, and it made it easy for the Hmong during that time to side with the French. And he grew up seeing my grandfather's service to the French army and in assistance of hiding the French soldiers in the mountains of Laos. So then it was easy for him to volunteer to do that kind of work, and enough money so that he can have a source of income. So it was early on where they were soliciting a group of individuals to be trained in Laos, and my father was the earliest group that went to Udong, Thailand. Quickly after that, there was a shift to respond to guerrilla warfare with guerrilla warfare. And that's where the Hmong excelled, because it wasn't a conventional soldier-to-soldier fight, but it was, the territory. The North Vietnamese army is coming through on the Ho Chi Minh Trail right into the backyards of the Hmong region. Then the mission shift to disrupting the supply lines, protecting the radar positions in northern Laos. And the third prong to the mission is rescue any American pilots that have been shot down. As the war escalated, it became more intense. The NVA wanted to move more equipment down to South Vietnam. What originally looked like it was going to be a slow-paced war became one of the major theaters in Southeast Asia. And so what started out as a few hundred soldiers became, at the height of it, was about 35 to 40,000 Hmong soldiers. And that's one of the significant impacts of the Hmong community to this war, is their contribution of men and women who went in to serve and rescuing American pilots, protecting the radar positions, and disrupting the supply lines. My father told me this specifically as well, is when President Kennedy was killed, everyone was worried, and the whole Hmong army was disturbed that President was killed, and this is serious. We don't know what the future will hold. But it was a step-by-step process in which eventually led to where the war was lost.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate you sharing the fascinating story about your father and the service of so many Hmong soldiers during the Vietnam War.
Next up is Karen Heights Castelli and Bob Lent, who will share the story of Karen's brother, Wayne, who graduated from Elk Grove High School in 1964 and was killed in Vietnam in 1968.
Welcome, Karen and Bob. We hear that Wayne had a keen interest in animals, particularly horses. Could you tell us more?
Wayne started developing his interest in animals, and we were in 4-H, and he had a rabbit project. So he started his interest in animals, and every year since he was about 7, he asked Santa for a horse. Well, finally when he was 12, Santa brought didn't bring it to the door, but said that he had a horse. In order to encourage Wayne's horse addiction, we needed to have a house that you could put a horse in, and it wouldn't fit in our house in Florence. That's when they bought the house on Stockton Boulevard, just between Bond Road and Elk Grove Boulevard. And it was big enough and had a barn. So that was kind of the start of getting him, my life is going to be with horses. Bob's parents had property up in Volcano, property up in the mountains of foothills there. And they used to go up and gather cattle all the time, and I'll let Bob tell the stories about that.
Wayne's dad, Ray, was our insurance agent through Farm Bureau, Cal Farm Insurance. And he would come out to call on my dad. I don't know what year it was, but one year he brought Wayne with him. And that's how we became friends. And then they moved out here, but they lived in Florin at first, and they went to Florin Grammar School there. They went to the Methodist Church in Florin. They came here, and Carol was the nurse at school around 7th or 8th grade. And then I got to know Karen, and we became friends, and through various different adventures, all of us. First he went to Modesto Junior College, and he lived in Oakdale with a number of guys. I think Kenny Wold was one of them. I don't know, one of the Hoyts. Karen would probably remember the roommate. And Wayne also did some leather work. I have a belt that he made. I know he made a purse, things like that. He's a pretty fair artist. I've got some of his artwork in my office. Different media, like torn strips of paper and different colors, and made a bull rider and a bull. I have that. He was a great guy. He was just a great, great guy. I'll start crying here in a minute. So he was, and I'm not an expert on horsemanship, more so now than I was then for sure, but he rode just like it was one animal moving. He had a horse for one. He could ride a horse bareback better than most people could ride in the saddle. And we always thought that I'd do the farming and he'd do the cows, and after Vietnam we'd get that all going, and we had horses turned out up on a ranch at Chinese Camp in Tuolumne County, and he just never came back.
So Wayne was in Modesto then. He went to Modesto JC. So now he's in Chico. So it's his junior year at Chico because he did 2 years at Modesto. I don't know why, but for some reason he and a professor had a disagreement of some kind. Wayne just dropped the class. He received his orders to report September 13th, 67. He was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training. So, well, that draft board had about 15 minutes notification. They sent him a letter. I thought, well, he kind of thought once that happened that he'd have a little bit of time to kind of, okay, I can go get another class and get in. It's just the university just sent something off to the draft board and the next day you get a letter that fast. So he went to Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training, and then he went to Fort Polk, and just prior to being assigned to a tour of duty in Vietnam. He left for Vietnam in February 29th of 68. He was in Company B, 1st Battalion, 12th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division. I swear to God, the only reason that's the unit he joined was because it was the cavalry. And he probably thought he was going to get to ride the horse. A bugle and a blue hat. He reported on February 29th to Vietnam. Well, he was killed by small arms, short range fire.
Thank you for joining us, Karen and Bob. We are grateful to you for sharing the story about Wayne's tragic loss in Vietnam, and thank you for sharing his memory with us.
And now we are joined by Butch Rivera, a graduate of Elk Grove High School who served in Vietnam in the 1960s. He will also share a story about Wayne Hines.
Hello, my name is Butch Rivera. That's what everybody calls me, but my real name is Gaudencio Rivera. And it was pretty hard to pronounce back then, so everybody just called me Butch. I went to Vietnam April 11th, 1967, and to April 11th, 1968. I was a good friend of Wayne Hines. I went to grammar school with him. I went to high school with him. And I met him in Vietnam back in 1968. And I happened to see Wayne Hines in Cameron Bay. That's where most of the people come into Vietnam. From there they go to their duty station. And I was going on R&R to the Philippines to see my relatives that I never seen before. So I went and met my cousin where she was working in Manila. And she took me to where my father was born. And I came home, I went back to Vietnam after that. And anyway, when I met Wayne, I just happened to be walking and I seen him sitting down, and I went up. I thought I recognized him. I wasn't sure, but I just went over there and I said, "Is that you, Wayne?" He says, "Yes." Well, anyway, he asked me if I would go see his mom and dad and tell him that he made it there all right. And I told him that I'd go see him. But sorry to say, I never did go. I know I just didn't have it into me to go up there and talk to him because I don't know, I felt like I might have break down, and they would start breaking down too and crying, and I didn't really want to, have anything to do to hurt their feelings or anything like that. When we landed in San Francisco, I didn't really want to go home, so I went and stayed at my cousin's house, my uncle's house in Richmond, and I spent the week there. And I didn't even tell my parents I was home yet. I just wanted to just mellow out, I guess. And my cousin, she was going to college in Berkeley, and she took me to meet her friends, and I got to go to a concert and see Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company, and that was fantastic. And I spent there a week, and after that, then I went home and seen my parents. I think, everything was okay.
What an incredible story, Butch. Thank you for sharing so much.
And now we'll hear from Manuel Galvez, who will not only share his own story, but those of his two brothers, Fred and Joe. All three served in Vietnam in the 60s.
Welcome, Manuel. Can you tell us a little bit more about your family?
Out of the 11 boys, well, there's 11 boys and 4 girls. Out of the 11 boys, there was 8 that went into military, 3 to Vietnam, and 1 caught the tail end of the Korean War. Fred went to Vietnam 65. He went with Big Red 1. They went by ship. It took 21 days. They landed in the port of Saigon. There were 1,500 men. Out of the 1,500, 5 originally soldiers survived. 5. And he came home. He was a basket case. And then after that, then I went to Vietnam. I went to Florin Elementary. I went to Elk Grove High School. I graduated in 66. 67, I was in Vietnam. So I got into Vietnam December 15th of 1967. So when I came home for a 30-day leave to go to Vietnam, by then Joe was already in 9th Infantry Division. When he got killed, I had gone to work that day and we were lining up a bunch of equipment we were going to take to the port of Saigon to ship up north. And the sergeant come up and he says, Galvez, they want you in the orderly room, which is the office, and so I said, what's going on? And all kinds of little things went through my mind. I mean, and I never thought of Joe, never in a minute. So I went to the orderly room and there was a chaplain, he was a major. He said, you Galvez? And I said, yes, I am. He said, come on in here, and walked to Major's office, which our commander, and he told him, he said, get out. So the major got up and walked out. He said, sit down. So I sat down and he said, I don't want to beat around the bush or nothing, or he says, your brother got killed 2 days ago. And I looked at him, I started crying. I said, I don't think so, not my brother. And he said, you got a brother, Joe A. Galvez? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, he got killed 2 days ago. By then I just fell apart and I started crying. I cried for about a half an hour. And I thought, why? Finally I came out and he had talked to my commander and he said, this guy's going home tonight. So they rushed me to go get all my stuff packed. Then he told the major, he says, where's your Jeep? And he says, parked outside. And they took me to Tonsanut Air Base and dropped me off. I was the last one to get on that airplane, the very last. And I cried a little bit. And I thought of so many things to tell my mom and my dad. We landed in Oakland. They took us by bus to Travis. And there were literally, I'd say a couple thousand guys in this giant hangar. And this lieutenant, he walked us to the end of the hangar. He opened up the door and he said, we'll see ya. Walked outside and there were a bunch of hippies. And I didn't know what, well, I kind of did, I knew what a hippie was, but I didn't never think of it. And they threw beer cans, soda cans, dirty diapers. They called us baby killer. They had numerous names for us. And I'm looking at these people and I says, you guys don't even know me. So I walked over to these taxis and they had 25, 30 taxis there. And I asked this guy, I said, how much will you charge me to take me to Sacramento, California? $60. And I pulled out $60 and I gave it to him. He said, let's go. He took me to Sacramento to the truck stop on Stockton Boulevard, the Truckadero. And it was 5 o'clock in the morning. I knew my mom and nobody was up. Threw my duffel bag over my shoulder and walked to my brother's house, Charlie, left my duffel bag there and went home. Dog chased me around from the back to the front, scared the heck out of me. My sister came to the door. Manuel, what are you doing here? And I said, I just got home. She opened the door, started yelling at the dog, and I came in. My mom and dad came around the corner, and I remember apologizing to them. And I had this thing rehearsed in my mind a million times, and I forgot what I was going to say, and I just started crying to him, I'm sorry about Joe. You're going to think this is goofy, but my mom called my grandmother and asked, what do I do so my sons can be protected and safe? And my grandmother told her, this is an old custom from Mexico. So she said, you got to get one of his clothes, garments or something, and put it on your mattress and have it there every day. I mean, sleep with it. So she stuck it under her mattress, and Fred came home. Everything was fine. Well, then I went. She got one of my t-shirts and put it under her mattress. And she forgot Joe. She always thought she was the cause of Joe dying. And I said, Mom, it was just it was in the cards. It was his time to go. No, so we quit talking about it. But up to the day she passed away, she always believed that she was the cause of Joe dying because she didn't get one of his clothes articles and put it under her mattress. That was a burden she carried from 68 until the time she died.
Thank you, Manuel. We appreciate your moving story.
On the line next is George Kepley, historian for the Elk Grove High School class of 1965. He has a story to share about one of his classmates.
Welcome, George. What's the story?
This is the story of Kathy Rule and her dedication to the service members of the Vietnam War. Kathleen Rule was born in 1947 and passed away in 2008. Her parents are Holly and William Rule. Mr. Rule was a Navy veteran and worked at the Sacramento Army Depot, as well as owning the Broadway Bait and Tackle Shop in Sacramento. As a child, Kathy and her family lived in the Tokay Park development in Florin, where she attended Florin Elementary School and later Elk Grove High School, graduating in 1965. In high school, she was very active, including being a varsity cheerleader and a Miss Elk Grove Princess in a competition then part of the area's annual Western Festival celebration. After high school, Kathy gave up a steady bank job to pursue her dreams of making music. But in 1968, she determined to entertain U.S. troops in Vietnam. She organized a band and located a booking agent who could help with all the logistics of going to Vietnam as a private citizen. She arrived in Saigon just as the Tet Offensive was launched by the Viet Cong, and for over 2 years she performed for soldiers on isolated fire bases, often cutting songs short to race for bunkers as rockets flew overhead. She returned to the States once to reorganize the act, but quickly returned for another extended tour. As a result of her dedication, Kathy was designated as an honorary Navy lieutenant, and she received many other commendations from military units across Vietnam. In 1989, she reunited with other band members who recalled the dangers they faced in Vietnam. This reunion was part of a special episode on the TV show China Beach. The episode was titled Souvenirs, and Kathy received a Peabody Award for her role with the episode. There were 2 stories that Kathy commonly shared when talking about her experiences in Vietnam. One was when the band was running late in getting organized, and they missed by just a few minutes their transport in a supply convoy to the next fire base. Upon later arriving at their destination, they learned that shortly after leaving the supply depot, the convoy was attacked and overrun by the enemy with the loss of all members. That close call brought home the reality of where she was and the perils with which she was confronted. In spite of the risks, the incident only serves to reinforce Kathy's determination to perform for the troops. The second story she told was about the night she was on the stage performing in the late summer of 1968 at the Chu Lai Air Base just south of Da Nang, Vietnam. In the middle of a number, she couldn't help notice 2 servicemen working their way through the audience to locate chairs. She easily recognized one of the troops as a classmate from Florin Elementary and Elk Grove High School. Without missing a beat, she called out to Steve Bingen, whom she had known since the 4th grade. Throughout the remainder of her performance, she pointed out Steve and made him the focus of her songs, as if he was the only one in the audience. For Kathy Rule, as a civilian, she had no business in Vietnam during the war. But after organizing an act, she went through an extraordinary effort to get to and find her way around the country. She sought out every opportunity to bring a respite from war, no matter how brief, to those of her generation who were thrust into the throes of combat. For this dedication and determination, she is remembered as a hero.
Wow. Thank you, George, for sharing that wonderful story. We should all strive to have Kathy's determination and passion.
Next, we're joined by Steve Bingen, who served in Vietnam in the 1960s.
Hello, this is Stephen Bingen, Elk Grove class of 1965. Before that, I was at Florin Elementary School from the 4th grade through the 8th grade. I was in Vietnam from February 6th of 1968 until February 5th of 1969. I served as an infantryman with the 196 Light Infantry Brigade, and which was one of the brigades of the Americal division, the 23rd Infantry Division. I served my entire tour between Da Nang and Chu Lai, west of a small city called Tam Kee. And, you know, it was pretty rare that any of us got to visit the base camp at Chu Lai, the 23rd Infantry Division base camp. I think I was there at the rear to visit the dentist and to get from my unit out in the field. It entailed getting a helicopter ride from our fire support base about 15 miles to the South China Sea. And there were no roads. Everything came and went on helicopters, including water, food, everything. So I had taken a helicopter ride to LZ Baldy, which was a little bit east of where I was operating. And from there, I went to the Chu Lai Air Base for my appointment. While I was in the rear area, one of the guys there said, "Hey, Steve, come on, let's go. There's a USO show that's happening pretty soon. Let's go check it out." I said, "Okay." So what happened was we hitched a ride. You know, there's vehicles. You could just hitch a ride, and they would always pick you up, and they drove us to the USO show, and we were below the stage there, and I walked up to the stage, and I was shocked to see, totally shocking to see somebody that I'd known since I was about 10 years old. It was Kathy Rule. She was one of the most attractive girls in the whole school the whole time I went to Florin Elementary and Elk Grove High School, and I walked up to the stage, and she looked, and her jaw dropped open, and she waved and stuff like that, and I was so surprised to see that I don't think I reacted in any way, and I feel bad that I probably didn't strike up a conversation with her, but I didn't want to intrude on the performance or the function she was performing on, so I didn't really say much, but I remember it just like it was yesterday, and it's one of those things that you never forget, and you think about it a lot, and like I say, having that experience was one of the most positive things about serving the country, which I gladly did, and I'm proud of my service, proud of my unit. I went to Vietnam as a PFC, and I came home as a Sergeant E5, and my service in the U.S. Army was a big part of my life.
Halfway around the world, two childhood friends encounter each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. That's just amazing. Thank you, Stephen.
Talk about small world, right?
Exactly.
Thanks.
On the line next is Luna Huang. Luna was born in Vietnam during the war.
Luna, can you share your earliest memories of what life was like in Vietnam then?
Most of my life I was in school. And then when 1975 came, and in Saigon and some city around Saigon start to hear the communists is coming over to invade. Then one of my mom's sister, she lives in another city. She came by, took me with her. And so that's when she planned to escape, to leave the country. There's a big truck on the back of the truck. The first shell is where I stay, and with other of my cousins. And in the bottom is a whole bunch of pigs. It takes us, I think, maybe half of the day to drive to a town of fishermen people. And we went there. I think we stayed there for a day or so. And then my auntie tried to find a way to leave. And we can see a lot of soldiers from different cities. That's our own soldier. But they want to escape from the communists too. The city is lost. And so they went to the beach, that where all the ships and the boat, and we don't have enough room for everybody. And so my uncle on the boat say, why don't myself and my two younger sisters at that time, one of them was not even 5, the other one is about, I think, 6.5. We went home and eat dinner with him and stay with him for a night. When we decided to go back to the boat, none of the boat was there. And so I don't know what to do. I just hold my sister and cry and say, what are we gonna do? It's just like totally lost. But I thank God. And there's a guy just came out and asked, why are you guys here? So your auntie is my older sister. And I said, oh my God. He took a very big basket. You know, I don't know what you call that, but the one that you can really go into the ocean. It's a very, very big one. He put 3 of us in there. And he know exactly where to take us. And tons of, hundreds of boats out there. And finally I got in there. Wow. Very lucky. And so we was in the ocean, I think for a couple days, and then we decided to go further and further into Pacific Ocean. And I think we stayed there probably a couple days. And very big ship of, I think, American people that ship containers of things from country to country, and they rescue us. Maybe 1,000, I don't know how many, maybe 10 to 15,000, I don't know. And so we take turns, and actually we have to take turns, but you just fight for your life. We just climb up and climb up. When we climb up, you can see people fighting. First you have to love yourself, and then you just try to take care of your own people in your family. You can see a lot of people drop from that high up, huge and high and dark and raining and windy. It's just like, I don't know, I've never been to hell before, but to me, the picture, if I have to draw it or go back to it, it's just no fire, but that's how I feel. But when we fight for life, we don't wait, and we don't share, and we very selfish and just think, I want to live. So I'm not gonna let you go first. No lady first and no children first at that time. You just fight for your life. And so people drop down into the ocean, and nobody there have the mind to rescue you. Even the people on that miracle ship cannot rescue you. When we got onto that miracle ship, then they ship us, I think, for my first refugee camp is in Guam. And then from that, they shipped me to a camp, Pendleton, down in the south. And I stayed there, I think, for almost 4 months, because I don't want to leave, because I want to stay there just in case I find my family. So I was praying that maybe my parents or my other brothers escaped and came later. And luckily, one lunchtime, I dragged my 2 younger sisters to get in line to get lunch, and we saw a guy wearing dark glasses. We looked at his clothes. Whatever he's wearing is very, familiar. And we just stand there, very ugly, very dirty, very messy, no shoes, but the paper place wrapped up is our shoes. Hair is like, I think if I go back, maybe I'll try that hairstyle, sometimes. But we look at that guy and we said, hey, that clothes look very familiar. And he couldn't recognize us, because in his mind, I don't think he think that was his own sister. And then we just get close, and then we just say, are you and that? And then he said, oh my God, are you Thu? Are you Liên? Are you Ngân? And I said, yes. And then we just hugged, and at that time, it's just like, I don't need anything else. I got everything I need right here. But we got to Oakland. Until today, I still remember him, which is my sponsor. His name is Stephen B. Hoag, and his last name spelled H-O-A-G, and our last name spelled H-O-A-N-G. So I feel like he knows, God knows, kind of putting, the similar people in some way together. And he was a very, very generous, religious man. But we lived with him for almost 5 years. And all of those 5 years, every single day is a good day. to me and to my family, he's the real living saint.
Thank you, Luna, for sharing the vivid and heart-wrenching story of your family's journey.
Next is Billy Doe, who was born in Vietnam and who escaped communist Vietnam at the age of 19.
Billy will share the story of his three attempts to escape and his long and difficult journey to the U.S. and eventually to Elk Grove.
My name is Billy Doe. I come from the south city of Vietnam. My father he's from North Vietnam. He escaped from Vietnam in 1954 and he went to work for military back there in Quy Nhơn, and that's how he met my mom. He started build a family from there. He born me and then I grew up from there. And then in 1975, the communists took over South Vietnam. It was very bad. Communists good at lying and killing. They lie to you if you don't follow them, and they start, capture you, put you in jail, or killing you somehow, right? So that's why at that time, everybody in the South Vietnam, as a young man like me, they just took us out, like make us go to either work for government. They say that volunteer, but nobody volunteered. They just come and took us away. Or that time in 1979 is war with Cambodia. They get all of us to join the military, and then everybody tried to escape. So I'm one of them to escape. So I tried to escape. The one that I successful is the third one. The first one, they caught me. They put me in jail for 3 months. And then they released because I tell them that I was younger, 15 years old. So that's why they're releasing me, and then I go home and then I try to escape again. The second one, they caught it again, but I ran. I just jumped into the water and then escape at night. So I just told myself before I go, either I go free or I die. I don't want to get caught. So then the third one, I made it. So 6 days on the sea, and then hijacker, or you call pirate. We say pirate, but actually they are not. They are actually fishermen. And then caught us, and then they took us, they released us to that island called Cora. They took all the engine out and then they leave us there. So they as a group of military belong to UN. So they take us there, and then we stay there for 6 days. And then there's a boat bring us into the Thailand. And then I stay in a refugee camp for 10 months. So I always say that I go to USA. So finally I accepted, and then I came to America in 1982, April in 1982. But during the 10 months in the refugee camp, I learned English there too, until the school season started. So I went to Dienza College. So I graduated there for a degree as an electronic technician. Then I go to work for electronics company. So, and then later I marry. Over here at that time, it's hard to get married here. So that's why, because at that time, mostly the family send the men out because there's no future for the men there, and then the communists will took all the men anyway. So all parents want to send their son out, and then I went back to Vietnam to get married, to meet my wife and get married. So then I get married and then I get kid, and then I have 4 kids now, and 3 of my kids in college. The oldest one is graduated from UC Santa Barbara. My son is in college, University of Santa Cruz, and my third daughter, she's in CSE right now. She's going to transfer to UC Irvine next year. And I have one younger one, she's in 10th grader right now, Franklin High. I try to share this story because I want to tell you that how bad communists were. That's the reason why I escaped to come to America. But I still love my country, but I'm not going to live there if still communist. Communist is no human right. Communists, they won't let their parents, take care of their kid like normal. They think that they own the kid. So then the parent, nothing to do with it.
Thank you, Billy. Your story is filled with such unbelievable determination. 3 escapes. Wow, that takes a lot of courage.
Indeed. Now we'll check in with Henry Ung, who will discuss the gut-wrenching challenges of families living in a war zone, fleeting uncertainty, and the life-threatening circumstances after the U.S. left Vietnam.
I just sat down with my mother-in-law last few days, so my story is going to be from her perspective. She was born in 1950, and at the time they lived in North Vietnam. In 1954, that is when the country divided between North and South. She retold that the North tried to discourage people from migrating to the South, and they do it through, I guess, as bad as killing people or imprison them. But still, they fear that if they stayed, they hear a story that communists would come in and kill the male in the family and then took whatever wealth they have and supposedly redistribute it to the poor. So she said that people who have some kind of wealth, they most likely decided to migrate to the South. And especially Catholics. Catholics were persecuted. It's not like you can pack your bags and leave. So what they did is they say, they split up the families into smaller groups. They would pretend that like they would go to work or carrying wheat to the field, carrying wheat back, and then sneak through the jungles, then through the coast. Life was relatively stable for her at that time, and she attended school until 3rd grade, which is around 1959 or 1960. So she met her husband and then got married at age 18. So when she got married, which would be around 1968, from the countryside, it's when the war really intensified with the Viet Cong fighting the guerrilla war. So it affected them because they live in fear. So she feels that she's always on edge and living kind of day by day, not knowing what will happen next. When the U.S. pulled out in 1972 and the war ended in 1975, she said life begins to get harder. Money has no value, so they often survive by trading gold for food, for goods. They have bits of gold and they cut it up and they'll trade it. Her husband was sent to re-education camp for 2 years after the war, as many men in Vietnam, or some women, if they were involved with the South Vietnam government or military. When they say re-education, I mean like a slave camp. That's what they say, more like prison. Life under communist rule continued to deteriorate for her, for them. It's just hard to scratch a living. She said the communists is like watching and have neighbor watching neighbors, so it's just hard in general. They find that life is unbearable and the government is being hard on them, taking people's land and money away and giving to the people that supported the communist cause. Some people, or most people, they decided to leave the country, and they decided that as a family, her husband would be the first to leave. The plan is to have him smuggle him through the jungle with the help of local people and then into the coast and escape by boat. He made it through with his brother. They were rescued and they were sent to Malaysia for about 1 year. He settled in Washington, and then through connection to friends who knows, he settled in San Jose, where he worked and sent money home to his family. And he then began the process of trying to sponsor his wife and 5 kids that remains. So she grew impatient in Vietnam because it's her raising 5 kids under communist rule. So they decided to escape through the same channel. A few tried and they get caught and they get sent back home, and then they try again. So after I believe the 3rd time, her 3 sons was able to made it through to the boat and then through the larger ship and then go to Malaysia for a few years. And then her daughter, which is my wife now, and her brother, her older brother, would go on the next wave. So Malaysia in 1989 to 1990, so they immigrated here in 1990, and they resigned in San Jose from 1990 till 2001. She recounts that it's hard, when they first got here too, but nothing compared to what it was. So to her, it was a happy time. So hearing people from the Vietnamese community in San Jose, stories that they were migrating to Sacramento, Elk Grove, they decided to move to Elk Grove and buy a house. Elk Grove Boulevard was only 2-lane road at a time. So she's lived in Elk Grove since 2001, which has been the longest since she stayed in any one place since she was born. She fell in love with Elk Grove living here, and since she moved here, the community has grown. There's a Vietnamese church on Florin Road, and from there she met a lot of people. She reconnected with a lot of people from her village, which is amazing, right? Half the way around the corner, and she found friends.
Thank you so much, Henry. We're so happy to hear that your family has found a happy life in Elk Grove. And again, thank you so much for telling us this story.
Yeah, it shows the real beauty of community and what community can provide for a lot of people. And now we'll speak with Thuy Nguyen, who was born in Vietnam just before the U.S. pulled out of the area. Thuy lived under the communist regime until her late 20s when she married a U.S. citizen.
Welcome, Thuy.
I just came here more than 20 years, and I come by getting married with American person in Vietnam. He came to Vietnam to looking for oil company, and I got married for 13 years with him. First, I came here, I lived in Seattle and then Hawaii. I love Seattle very much. At first, I don't. It took me 2.5 years to get in love with it because everything is too new for me. I have to study, I have to learn everything from A to Z, and I don't even know how to turn on the heat, and I even not know how to use the vacuum because we use different, right? In Vietnam, we don't have that kind of machine, so everything I just find out by myself. I grew up in South Vietnam. I was born and grew up in South Vietnam, and I lived right in front of the ocean. So I see, at that time I was young. It's about 7 years old. But I see a lot of people, I hear a lot of gunshot and everything when people at the 1975. I still remember how many people see the people die. It's very scary. We see a lot of dead people die and burn and everything, but my family at that time, my mom wanted to tell us to go too, but because of that, so many dead people on the ship and everything, it's scary. I cry and we don't want, like because of us, they're not going. But many people run like that, and my dad wanted to take us too, but my mom said the kid is too young, and that's how we're not going. At that time, my family have 4 children already. The last one was born about a few months. I don't remember exactly. I remember the world, how it looked like and everything, how hungry we are and how we eat the food because we cannot go out and get the food. We have to try. It's very, very hard to eat. My father, at that time, he tried to run from the communists. He wanted to become a Buddha. He said he wanted to go to the mountain to become a Buddha at the temple. So my mom cried and she said she don't want that because he still have duty with the family, with the kids and everything. He lay for become a Buddha at the temple. So my dad have to go to present with the communists, and then they take him. They said he only go to study, like to study. They said go to class and study for 15 days, but then he gone for 5-6 years. He brainwashed him when he got home. He totally changed, a different person. We cannot recognize that our father anymore. But his brain changed, so sometimes he's very nice, quiet and everything, but he still talk with us and everything, but sometimes he's just, when he changed a devil, it's really scary. Everybody just want to be away from him. Even my mom, everybody love him but cannot be close with him. He passed away very early when he was 55 years old. And my mom, I just take her home, take her here for 4 years now. Try to bring my mom here because she get old and she need to be happy and see the difference from Vietnam and Americans. She knows it's a big difference. First thing is she surprised that over here is a lot of freedom. You do whatever you like, you want, and she loves the way is the environment of American. She always says, I'm so happy to be here because American treat the people so beautiful.
Thank you, Thuy, for sharing your incredible story and the transition your family went through when they came here and what they recognized and found to love.
Next, we'll hear from Lynn Countryman, whose father was a U.S. serviceman and whose mother was Vietnamese. Lynn was actually airlifted out of the country in 1975.
Welcome, Lynn. How old were you when you were airlifted out of Vietnam?
Well, I was born in '72, Vietnam War. I was in the orphanage. I came over to America, but when I came over, basically the last plane that came over got shot down of orphans. I was the one actually before that. So I was actually the last plane that made it, and then the one that came after me got shot down, from what I've been told by lots of people. I was born over there. My mother is Vietnamese, full Vietnamese, and my father was GI. And I'm very lucky because there's a lot of people that were left over there that were mixed, that because they were mixed, they don't fit in on either side. And so they didn't get adopted. And it really, realistically, the only reason I got adopted was because my natural mother, I believe, told everybody over here that I was not living, basically dead, and they found out I was alive with the intent to adopt me. So I was very lucky on that one. You know, my natural mom, I've known her my whole life. I've kind of distanced myself from her, you know, just for whatever reasons. So I haven't really had somebody to talk to about the history of me, and I've only gotten what I've been able to grasp from what she said, what other people have said, and what I've heard, you know. It's just interesting, the dynamics that play. Just one thing in life can change. You know, I was on the plane right before, you know, and it could have easily gone another route, so. I was on my own at 16, and I got in touch, you know, I was in touch with my natural mother after that. Kind of hung out with her for a while. I was never into drugs or any of that partying kind of life. I mean, I drank and partied that way, but I never did that. So we didn't see eye to eye on that, and so I kind of removed myself from that situation. Because for a while I was hanging out with her because I wanted to, you know, every child wants to know their mom, especially if you feel like you were abandoned, or, you know, all those issues come up. And I'm sure I have deep-seated issues about it. They don't really come up. My family is who I'm with now. It's hard being sometimes Asian when you have all these friends and they'll crack these jokes and they won't know. And I don't take it, oh, you're being racist, and I go get mad or something. I just say, hey, that's not appropriate to say. You don't know who is who these days. And then they'll ask me, well, what do you mean? What do you care? And I'm like, well, I was actually born in Vietnam. You know, and they're like, really? What? You know, and then they, oh my gosh, you know, I feel so bad. I go, no, you should feel bad for saying it in the first place, not for who you say it to. I can't say that I'm Asian. I can't say that I'm an American, but I can't say I'm white. People think I'm Filipino, or they think I'm Hawaiian or Spanish. I mean, I've got freckles, and I'm half Irish. My dad is Irish. So for me, being half Asian, I guess, it's not something I'm proud of, it's not something I'm not proud of, that's just who I am. And my big saying that I tell everybody is, I cannot control what people say, what other people do. I can only control how I react to it, or how I respond to it, and how I carry myself through that. You know, I've been bashed before, and you know, people have been mean to me before, and you know, I used to cry, and I cried myself to sleep before, and now I'm just like, you know what, those people just need a hug. It's not even worth my time to worry about anymore, because the people that matter, which are the people in my life, they know the type of person I am and how I live my life. It took a long time to accept who I am and be happy with who I am. I didn't have a great childhood, and honestly, some of my childhood I don't remember, some of it I wish I didn't. And I'm not placing blame on my adopted parents, but I had to look long and hard to find myself, and I'm still figuring myself out. The one thing is, positivity breeds positivity. This is how I live my life. That's the biggest thing, that and knowing that I can't control what other people say or think.
Thank you so much for joining us, Lynn, and for sharing your uplifting message of peace and harmony. I'm sure we could all use that nowadays.
Yeah, especially about finding yourself. We've all been through a lot, so that's a very good piece of advice and insight. Next, we'll hear from Mel Pearson, who served in Vietnam in the 1960s and is a 1965 graduate of Elk Grove High School.
Mel will share with us how he has dealt with the impact of the war on his life. Welcome, Mel.
What I wish to share is about philosophies, observations, and attitudes that I have had, and how they have completely changed in the last 50 years. Before I ever set foot in Vietnam, I accepted the domino theory that communism had to be stopped, or it would take over all of Southeast Asia. And so I enlisted. Once in country, I had an eye-opening event that caused me to question my original thoughts. I was riding in the back of a truck in a convoy and I saw civilians lining up on the side of the road, yelling, "Go home, Joe!" I think I've been sold a bill of goods. What the hell am I doing here? So I did my time and I made it home. I was separated from active duty in November of 1968, just a week after turning 21 years old. I walked into the Slough House bar. Wow, I could legally be in a bar. What happened that day would help define the next 13 years. They all knew who I was and where I had just come home from. Instantly, slaps on the back as well as outcries, "Bartender, give this kid a drink." And I pulled up a bar stool. This felt so good, I made a regular habit of it for the next 13 years. Finally, in 1973, U.S. combat troops were pulled from Vietnam. It had been 5 years since I was there, and I had been anguishing ever since. In the spring of 1975, we watched on TV an American helicopter on the roof of the American Embassy, evacuating CIA officials and Marine Corps guards. Later that day, Saigon fell. More time on the bar stool. Fighting this war in my mind while on the bar stool was beginning to take me to the bottom. I had to get honest about the bar stool and fighting a war that ended long before. April 20th of 1982 was my first sober day, and by the grace of God, I have continued sobriety to this day. I was beginning to open up and let down my guard. My attitude towards the people began to change for the better. Life is much easier with love than hatred. As time went on, I began to soften so much, I wondered what would it be like to visit Vietnam? I thought about it a lot. There was a last chapter I needed to write in the story I carried in my mind. I concluded I had to face this to heal. In 2006, I met a fellow in a place where people who used to sit on bar stools go. He had been back to Vietnam 4 or 5 times and was very knowledgeable about how and where to go. This was exactly what I was looking for. After retiring from the military, he had become a professional clown and would go back to entertain children and bring donated money for prosthetic limbs for children who had lost their limbs playing with unexploded ordnances. I asked Michael, "How did you come to be doing this?" He said he was doing his part to amend all the harm we had inflicted on the Vietnamese people. Wow, was this different? I began to reflect on how much of my life I had wasted on resentments and animosity. I don't have time to relate to every second of that 2-week trip. However, there was a small part of the story that really impacted me. We were in Hanoi, in what used to be called North Vietnam, and Michael said, "Come on, I want to introduce you to a boot cobbler that makes my clown shoes." We walked into this small shop, busy and cluttered with shoes and leather. Behind the counter stood a man, perhaps 5 years older than me. Michael said to him, "This is my friend Mel, and he is just wandering around kicking up bones." The man said to me, "You first time Vietnam?" I said, "No, I had been there before." His response, "You American military?" We were standing very close to each other, eye to eye. I realized I was looking at the former enemy. I said yes, and he reached out to pat me on the shoulder and said, "Was long time ago, my friend." What happened that night was that I was forgiven, and I learned to forgive. I managed to come home, and I have been different ever since.
What a journey, but with such beautiful outcomes and hopes and promises for the future. Thank you, Mel, for sharing your story and all the perspectives that you learned along the way. These are just some of the moments that make up part of our history. These stories are remembered because they are told to our children, and our children will tell their children.
Before you go to bed tonight, if you're able to, call your father, your mother, your brother, your grandmother.
Call that cousin halfway across the country that you always avoid.
Just call them and ask them to tell you their story. Then ask yourself who you'll tell it to.
This is Renee Boline.
And this is Eliel Ramirez Gutierrez.
Thank you for tuning in to History Today on Elk Grove Radio.
This audiocast was a production of the Linda May and Lima Foundation and is protected by copyright.
To support the work of the Foundation and to enjoy our other audiocasts, please visit our website at lmmlfoundation.org.